A ka hae te ata ka hapara te ata ka koro ki te manu ka warerita kutu ko te ata nui ka harai nā kataki te umeri he pō he ao ka wote e tihei I mauri ora. Te mihi tuatahi mihi ki nā atua kaharawa, a ho mai o kaha, ho mai o arawa, ki a mātou I tēnei wā I nā Whakatau hoki. Tēnei nā mihi nā atua. Ka huri au taku whakaro ki nā tini aitua, ku wei atu ki te pō, ai e nā mati, o ia marae, o ia takiwā, o ia motu, haere, haere atura. Haere ki Hawaii nui, Hawaii roa, Hawaii pāmama, e nā mate, moi mai rā, moi mai rā, moi mai rā. Apati hono tātou ki a tātou, apati hono tātou hono rātou ki a rātou, nā kānuhi ora kua tai mai nei, nā kai kaunihera, nā mema o te komiti nei, nā manuheri, tēnā koutou nau mai hara mai, ki nā kaimahi o tēnei kaunihera hoki, tēnā koutou. So just standing to open our meeting today, hand back over to you, Michael. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you. And kia ora koutou, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Audit and Risk Committee meeting today. I have been informed that there is a quorum present, so I am pleased to declare this meeting open. We do have a new staff member who is representing the committee for the first time today, which is Curtis Morton. So Curtis, welcome to the meeting. And again, following the Mihi, welcome to all the guests who are present today. Just need to inform there has been a change to the order of business. Agenda item 9.4, the Treasury report from Bancorp, will be taken following agenda item 8.1, the response to notice of motion, establishment of a council-controlled organisation. Additionally, it is intended that we take agenda item 10.2.3, the legal update, at 2:30 p.m, which may require that agenda item 10 be moved prior to this item if the meeting has not reached that point in the agenda. The public excluded reports will be taken in order before we then return to open forum. There have been no apologies received. There are no conflicts of interest that I'm aware of. Does anybody have any conflicts they wish to note for today's agenda? No, thank you. There have been no requests for public forums, deputations or petitions. Is there any extraordinary or urgent business for today? No, thank you. And there are no notices of motion. So we will move into the minutes, the unconfirmed minutes of the Audit and Risk Committee from the 20th of February 2025 are on pages 10 to 30 of your agenda. Are there any matters of accuracy relating to the minutes that anyone wishes to raise? No, thank you. So the motion is that we confirm the minutes of the Audit and Risk Committee meeting held on 20 February 2025. Is there a mover? Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Sunkel. All those in favour? Anyone against? Carried. Okay, we'll get into the substantive part of the meeting. Agenda item 8, the reports for items for decision today. We have a response to the notice of motion regarding the establishment of a council-controlled organisation. And I'd like to invite Dave Mills and Mike O'Connor, please, to come and talk to the report, which is in the papers on pages 31 onwards.
Thanks, Chair. So I think we'll take the papers, because there's quite a lot as read, but I think it would be appropriate that actually we've engaged Mike to help us from O'Connor and Partners for this exercise and hand straight to Mike, and then we can take questions back from there.
Yes, thank you. That's appropriate. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks very much. Tēnā koutou, ko Mike O'Connor aho. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to the paper. As Dave said, understand that it's been circulated and pre-read. So very happy to take questions on it. I think before I do so, key points I just want to really emphasise here really is that CCO, CCTO structures and to be clear on the difference, of course, CCTOs relate specifically to trading activities, but are nonetheless still CCOs. These things have a they're very flexible structures for defined purposes. And so there's nothing inherently good or bad about the particular structures, but it is essential, and this has been borne out by the experience of other councils over a very long time now, that they need to give effect to a purpose. And I think one of the things that we've emphasised here is that purpose operates at two levels. Purpose is both consistency of purpose with the regional council's own purpose, and at the moment under current legislation that is reasonably permissive, but the government has indicated a desire or willingness to revert to restrictions that were in place a decade or so ago, which are rather narrower. So purpose in that context is important, but also to purpose in the context of will a better outcome result by using a CCO, CTO structure than would otherwise be the case. Our conclusion is in the absence of clarity of purpose, then there's no compelling reason in itself to create either a CCO or a CCTO. I think the last comment that I'd make in that context is CCOs themselves, put this another way, while CCTOs are very clearly about commercial activities, for-profit activities more particularly, CCOs are more general, but the uses of these sorts of vehicles, again, although it's very permissive in the legislation, have tended to be defined by the opinions expressed from the Auditor General, from the Royal Commission into Auckland governance structures, and by various reviews that have taken place for other councils. And so, in large part, CCOs, as distinct from CCTOs, are really best suited to one of two situations. One where the desire is to get an activity closer back to a very local community, and the other where there is some activity that sits across a number of local authorities, and in that case it's a useful container when there are several interested local authorities. So we provided, and this is a case of a picture speaks 1,000 words, on page 2 of our report, a little flow diagram, which I think really does sum up the thought process that should be applied when considering whether or not a CCO or CCTO structure should be applied. I presume you've all got that in front of you, but just to step through it very quickly, overriding issue is there a defined activity with a clear purpose? And if there's not, then whatever's intended should be kept within council. If the answer to that is yes, then the next question is it a distinct profit-seeking activity? And in our report, we gave the example of public transport. Public transport is a particularly interesting one because previously, under the public transport operating model, public transport was required to be held in a CCO or CCTO structure. That was relaxed, and that requirement is no longer there. And I think the important thing I want to emphasise about an activity like public transport is, while there is sound and good incentive to operate these things as cost effectively as possible, and to that extent, one might argue commercially, these are not typically profit-making activities. And I think that's extremely important, and I think it's an acknowledgement of that particular characteristic why under the new transport regime that was relaxed, enabling public transport activities to be conducted within council itself. So if it's not a profit-seeking activity, the next test is can the desired CCO advantages be achieved within the council with specified internal delegations, authorities and processes. So in this respect, the test here is there something so fundamentally wrong with the council's own structures and own processes, and whether or not things are not possible within a council structure. Only if the answer to those questions is yes, then that sort of leads you to the next and final test of whether or not the expected benefits of having a CCO structure outweigh the costs. Because as we point out, these are not costless activities, far from it. In fact, importantly, several councils who had CCOs and CCTOs disestablished them, and cost was an important feature. So if the answer to all of those things is no, then it sort of leads to the conclusion that an activity should be kept within council, and it's quite robust criteria in terms of the arguments as to why either a CCO or CCTO structure should be created. So that's probably enough babbling on from me. Very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mike. And look, I agree. Thank you for the paper, and particularly for that flow chart, which is in the papers. I think it steps through a very useful thought process for council to think about in relation to when you might consider setting up a vehicle such as a CCO or a CCTO. Thank you for that. Dave, do you think further you'd like to add at this point?
No, not at this point.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm happy to open for questions. Councillor Edge.
Thanks, Michael. That was a really good read, giving us the ins and outs of the advantages, disadvantages and problems associated with that. One thing I found really interesting, though, towards your conclusions, was that there are other mechanisms that don't need a CCO or CCTO that might be totally appropriate for this organisation and moving forward for that. But as you quite rightly say, it is the purpose. So the first thing that we need to do, really, if we want to do something along those lines, define the purpose and then the method by which that purpose could be actioned, if you like, joint venture, partnership, all those other things that you mentioned in your report. Is that your really key conclusion advice?
Largely, that's correct. I think importantly, though, and just to be clear about some of the technicalities of this, structures such as whether or not company or joint venture or any one of several different commercial arrangements all fit within the definition of a CCTO or a CCO. So think of it as a hierarchy. It is not as though a partnership, for example, is an alternative to either a CCO or a CCTO. It is one of the forms of which a CCO or CCTO could take. I think the critical point that really want to emphasise is the basic test is if there's something that council wants to do, are there sound reasons for it not to remain within council? That's the real test here. It's it's appealing to sort of potentially grab onto some of the possible advantages of having, for example, a company type structure. Whether or not it's a different governance or funding or any number of other things. But I think it's very important to actually draw down there, and I think we labelled one of the headings as the real versus perceived benefits that a CCO or CCTO structure would have. And I think crucial point is that many, if not most, of the advantages where I'm thinking here if I can find the exact expression. Just give me one moment, sorry. No, Murphy's Law says I can't find it at the moment. But the point was, when it comes to things like greater focus, greater accountability, cost control, those sorts of things, which one might think would flow naturally from having a company structure, for instance. There's no good reason why these things cannot themselves occur within a council environment anyway. In some respects, it's about systems and processes that are put in place in the existing structures, rather than have to sort of form a new structure which has an enormous amount of cost associated with it to achieve something that can be done otherwise in-house. That's the key point.
Thank you. Councillor Edge, you happy? Thank you. Any other question, comment? Yes, Councillor.
Thank you. Just a question that was put to me in this document, the establishment costs of CCOs and CTOs, and someone said, oh no, it won't cost that much, we could do it for much cheaper. I'm just interested in your comment on the validity of the numbers there, and I'm not challenging them, I've just been challenged by a few others. So the costs of setting up and then the ongoing running costs, and I'll have a second question.
No, thanks, John. As you would have noticed there on page 9, there is a wide range on the potential range of costs. The one thing you can absolutely guarantee is it's not costless. Whether or not savings can be made in particular parts of it, possibly. But from our experience as professional advisors, and bear in mind that in terms of setup costs, most of this is taking professional advice and professional services and setup. The cost is certainly reasonable in terms of what one would expect. So in terms of setup, I think we said anything between 500,000 and 3 million, depending on the nature of what it is that's being set up. And then when it comes to ongoing operating costs, something in the range of 600,000 to 1.7 million is very realistic. And in fact, as we note, that's really focusing on a limited scope of activity. So it could be more, unlikely to be less.
Thank you for that, and I'm very comfortable with it. And I'm just disappointed at the time we didn't finish the work with the investment committee, because I think I might have drawn a conclusion that we did not have enough assets to generate enough income to both take account of the setup costs and then the management and the like that sit in there. I have another colleague who says, yeah, that's all very good, but if we'd had a really good system and management sitting in a CCTO, then we would not have had the lost opportunity cost and we would have driven a business. Do you have any thoughts about the difference between where our costs might sit and opportunity cost down the line for not doing something, and going, yes, we could really work those assets hard if we had a dedicated team as opposed to sitting within an organisation?
No, thanks. That's a good question, and I think it kind of comes back, to my answer to Grant. Is the first test is what leads us to believe that we couldn't achieve cost-effective outcomes within a council structure as it is. So keeping everything basically in-house. I think probably the example here is we do quite a lot of work in cooperative world, and I think one of the takeaways that we observe, and bear in mind there's a lot of similarities between cooperatives and public authorities in the sense of in particular, difficulty of raising equity for particular purposes. But I think one of the takeaways from that is when managers and directors from corporate world are appointed to these bodies, yes, they have a commercial focus, but we also see all too often a misalignment of interests between those of managers and governance wanting to pursue particular commercial outcomes, which may in fact differ from the desires of the shareholder which may be broader in aspiration. In economics, there is a wonderful phenomenon known as principal agency risk. And the reality is that managers within commercial operations are incentivized to take on more risk than if they're actually paying for it out of their own pocket. It's a well-established phenomenon. And we tend to see these things, both within cooperative world, within CCO world, those sorts of things. So those are kind of the real but not easily observable costs, that can be associated with, with having, a much more conventional company type structure.
Thank you for that, and I'll have some comments and debate. So that's my questions.
Okay. Thank you. And what I would add, actually, just in relation to that, the opportunity cost or otherwise, as has been noted, actually, there have been a number of councils around the country that actually have shifted back to bringing things in-house because, in fact, they couldn't get the economic benefit or the better outcome that you otherwise might have envisaged you would have when they set up the CCTO to try and get this commercial return. So there has been some examples where that just hasn't proven to be the case, and they've ended up bringing them back in to try and get more economies of scale, actually, from within the kind of mothership, if you want a better description, than having them out into a separate thing. So it's very situational specific based on what they're doing, what the economic activity is, what the volume of that is, and the size and scale that might justify a separate structure around it. And that's the challenge with it, I think. Okay, just conscious to keep moving on this, please. Yeah, Councillor Edge.
I was just going to ask one quick question.
Yeah.
Page 8, under the heading Advantages, it says the real advantages of CCOs are they can push community assets and facilities closer to their local communities when this is desired, or provide vehicles for collaboration between local authorities. Have you got any experience of where local authorities have got together, collaborated on that?
Not direct experience, but importantly, this was a key takeaway of the Royal Commission in Auckland, where they really started to drill down into, why would one create a CCO? Why would a council create a CCO that was not a CCTO? The CCTO case is reasonably clear. It's about commercial profit-making activities. But since it's envisaged that a CCTO is a subset of a CCO, this question is, why would you have a CCO? And this was, I think, a key takeaway, and the logic behind it. So when it comes to local sports facilities or museums, art galleries, those sorts of things, which are very local, often very local, very specific in terms of purpose, but can often attract funding by way of donations, grants, those sorts of things, which are otherwise harder to manage in a consolidated environment such as council itself. So that's category number one. Category number two is, as I said earlier, when several local authorities, so bear in mind the definition of a CCO is one that is more than 51% owned by one or more local authorities. It's where several local authorities want to collaborate with each other.
Okay, thank you. I had Councillor Swiggs. No, he doesn't. Okay, perfect. Councillor Karakia.
Kia ora, Michael.
Kia ora.
Thank you for the paper. And I note that, in the paper itself, there were a lot of views on why we shouldn't do this. And I think that might have been around, as you've said in the introductory paper here, is that there wasn't a clear case, to actually instigate a CCO sort of kind of model, or CTO. All I was wondering is that out of this originally, because it could have been a knee-jerk reaction because of some of the projects that have been done to date, Kayanga would be one, another one, delay on the Odeon, all of that. And then there's also was some of the thinking around the notice of motion is that the potential that we actually have out there
I mean, Councillor Swiggs was in the paper this week talking about, solar farms. There's also, Morehouse Ave and all of that. You may remember that part of the discussion actually was about, so that there's business as usual, and then outside of that, is there a potential to be able to, develop a CCO kind of model, to do that. And when you were talking, it's a little bit like the iwi, and the fact is that, they've got the holding company, then they've got, and there were all sorts of reasons why they didn't let Te Runanga actually do a lot of the business stuff, so a little bit of that too. But I just looking at, some of the benefits of a CCO or CCTO, is that looking at it, I mean, you've got some sort of specialised management stuff there. I mean, CCOs can focus on specific areas of services. That was one particular aspect that we looked at. The other one was about the financial benefits as well. Access to different funding services that CCOs can get as opposed to local councils. You also had the improved financial accountability. CCOs often operate under different accountability frameworks, which can lead to better financial management and transparency. And then the other one that I thought was really interesting, they can really respond to really swiftly to changing conditions or community needs compared to traditional council structures. What do you think about, do you think that, I mean, there are some good points about CCOs. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks, Nick. I think it's really important to emphasise that, as I said at the start, there is nothing inherently good or bad about these structures. Those advantages that are proposed can be real. There's no two ways about it. The critical point that we're making is, not only we're making, but this is a point that the Auditor General was at pains to emphasise, was there's no good reason to establish a CCO or CCTO structure on the off chance that it might be used for something. So that's what's really important about this is, if a need or a potential candidate is identified, then running through the flowchart tests, rigorously and independently, if that leads to the conclusion that either a CCO or a CCTO should be set up, then that's fantastic. It's the right order of things. There's a wonderful expression in business, which I think we quoted in one of our headings, of structure follows strategy. Because what the risk is otherwise is if a structure is set up, it becomes very tempting then to think, we've got this, what might we use it for? And that's when suboptimal, that's when the risk of suboptimal outcomes arises.
Okay, thank you. Look, I'm just conscious of time. I think it's relatively clear from the paper and the discussions that if council chooses to, they can set up a CCO or a CCTO. There is a framework to do that. The question that keeps coming up is the structure versus strategy, which is one of my favourite sayings. Why would you do that? And I think that's clear. We did have some discussion earlier about the resolutions that were in the meeting pack and maybe wording those in a way which was slightly more positive in the context of the fact that we're affirming that council could in fact set up a CCO or a CCTO with the right circumstances, as opposed to the original wording, which was slightly more definitively saying don't set one up. So we have some new or a new motion that has been recommended. So I'll just give people a minute or two to read these because they're in a bit more detail. But the one in red are basically the new ones. So we received the report. Thank you, Michael, you and your team. Note that the Investment Entity Investigation Committee was established in 2020. Note that we have had external reports in the past on this matter. But importantly, that the new resolutions here agree that the criteria relevant to deciding whether a council-controlled organisation or CCTO have been summarised and have been reported to council, and agree that when deciding whether to establish a CCTO or a CCO, council should consider where there is a clear purpose that would be best achieved by the use of a CCO or a CCTO, and whether the benefits of establishing and operating a CCO or a CCTO are greater than the costs. And agree that as yet the Council has not identified a clear purpose that would best be progressed by establishing a CCO or a CCTO, and therefore recommends to Council that the establishment of a CCTO or a CCO is not progressed until it is identified that a CCO or a CCTO is the best mechanism for achieving the objectives. Happy to have, I've got a mover and I've got a seconder. Thank you, councillors. Anybody got any further discussion on that new resolution? Yes, Chair.
Yeah, I'm really happy. Just that number 5, is that an action to say that this will be summarised and reported to our council like at our next council meeting? Is that what it's meant to be? Is that the intention?
Yeah, so the intention is that the recommendation and the paper that goes to council would include those clear criteria.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Karakia.
Kia ora. Yeah, look, to me, looking at that, I mean, I support this because it's kind of like we're setting up a kind of framework, you know, where we can work to make that kind of decision there that we're talking about until it's identified that a CCO or CCTO is the best mechanism. Yeah, I support that.
Yeah, so it's a slightly more positive framing of until you identify that reason, but you now have a criteria that you could follow for that, given the advice that's been received on 2, maybe 3 occasions now. So I think it summarises the feedback nicely and gives the opportunity for council to make that decision should they do so in the future.
That's where Michael's report actually hit on that right at the beginning.
Yeah. Okay. I have a mover and a seconder. Sorry, councillor. One more.
I guess as a mover, just thank Michael for the report. It summarises where we got to in those years ago of thinking. We're not a Quayside, we're not a CCHL. We recognise that a number of entities have pulled things back into their place. So the real challenge is around a CCTO and a trading organisation, but also accept that a CCO may well be relevant into the future across some of those cross-boundary authority issues that may arise in time. So just, and I thank Carol and the team for the rewriting of the words so that it allows us in that positive space to be able to take things forward as and when we need. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Swiggs.
Thank you for the work that you've done on that, and actually thanks for bringing up all of the other work that was done on it. That was probably to me the most important and interesting part that I read about this report, and that really gave me a good insight to how the council has been grappling with this for quite some time, and I wasn't aware of that, so that was very positive on this. One thing from me is the IEIC work that was done previously in 2021 and 2020. I do think there's a scope to continue on with that, some of that work, and so I think these resolutions will be able to help pick some of that up, because what Councillor Sunkel has said sometime in the future, I actually think that is happening now. Those cross-boundary issues are happening right now. The cross-jurisdiction issues are happening right now. There are some certain circumstances and the legislation has changed, so we do have the opportunity to take some action now, and we have issues that we do need to confront. So I believe that if we can get this right, bring that back to council, I'm quite interested to pick up some of the work that was already done and really start to lay down some foundations so that we can stop talking about it and start doing something.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ward.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I'd like to thank Michael for the report. It's very thorough and it was a great read. Also to Carolyn for this rewriting of the motion. I think that's covered things off excellently. I mean, some people could say that there's problems with this report or issues, but I see it as an opportunity for our organisation going forward and to be able to be flexible and react to future direction in the future, like e.g. it might be solar farms or forestry or whatever. So I think it's a potential opportunity for this organisation to conduct business into the future.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no further questions or discussions, then we have some resolutions that have been moved and seconded. All those in favour? All right. Anyone against? Thank you. Carried. Thank you, Michael, for you and your team. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to part 9 of the agenda, items for information. And the Treasury report next? Yes. So we will move into the Treasury report. Please, Dave. So just while that's getting set up so that David has his presentation, understand this is an updated presentation, David, from the one that was in the report that's in the papers, Dave. So this, to be clear for council, is the updated presentation you're about to see will make its way into the papers going forward. So you will have a copy of this made available following the meeting, but this is a much more up-to-date report from Bancorp than what you have in the papers at present. Welcome, David. And Dave.
Thank you, everybody. It seems like it's been a long time since I was here last. Just circling back to that conversation with CCOs and CCTOs, Bancorp and myself have been involved in quite a lot of activity. Say again? There's 52 of them being set up. Yeah, so we've seen them used both well and not so well. So anyway, if this conversation has legs, please get us involved. I think we can contribute to that. So just an offer going forward. Right, as I say, there's been a bit going on. Yeah. So I'll pretty much take it as read that everyone's had a bit of a look at it, but I'll just run through it really quickly. So we're going to talk about the last 100 days. It's now the last 115 days. Reporting as of 31 March. There's been a couple of other swaps that were done that were done beyond 31 March as well, which was worth commenting on. Just a bit of an economic chat. What's on our mind? There's been some changes in terms of strategy approach that we discussed, as there's been a few changes in the last 3 months. There's altered our approach to interest rate risk management. And then hopefully you'll find this of value, special topic credit ratings, because, it's particularly good news from an ECAM perspective. And then just questions. But chip in at any time in terms of whether any questions come up. Rightio. I thought that quote was appropriate, and I was amused to find that it was also Vladimir Lenin that sort of came up with that as well. So if anyone knew that before seeing it, I was quite impressed. He also came up with the useful idiots line as well. So he had a couple of nice phrases. Look, I just don't think the changes that have been... Look, we don't know if the changes proposed are real or not, but if we take them at face value, they're potentially the most significant changes to the world order since World War II. So it's a really big deal. And as I say, you can't use the words predictable and clarity in the current sort of situation. But again, another thing which I think we're getting pretty close to as well. One of the things in terms of President Trump, he has followed the promises that followed the policies that he campaigned on. So the next one is the tax cuts. And given the size of the US deficits, and given their credit rating type issues, yeah, funny that we wrap that back into that as well. There's a whole lot of unknowns in terms of how this thing is going to unravel. Even if you look at you can possibly argue that the reason that the tariffs were put in place was to help the US out in terms of the deficits. The tariffs as a tax generating instrument. Right, so let's carry on. Rightio. Look, as to be expected from an ECAM point of view, everything is clean, tidy, easy. Your cost of funds is continuing to go down as the Reserve Bank keeps cutting rates. And we'll have my glasses on, but we have done some, I think the swaps are on the next page. Yeah, we have done some swaps, which in the bottom right-hand corner which I believe are actually at very good numbers. So, look, I think it's a really good story from an ECAM point of view. You've got good levels of cover and protection. You're still being able to benefit significantly by the fall in interest rates. Yeah, look, I think it's a pretty good story, and you're pretty well placed, or you're very well placed in terms of that sort of situation. It's just I'll stop there for a second just to grab a breath. But any questions at this point? I normally get a couple at this. Nope, carry on. Okay, I'll take that as read. Any questions? Let me know at the end. Just comments. This is really just background for yourselves. Key data in terms of the US market. Now, again, just going back to that, because a question that I often get asked, well, look, why is there such a big focus on the US when it comes to New Zealand, particularly from an interest rate point of view? Another way of looking, I think did we discuss that? Yeah, like another way of looking at, if you're a global fund manager, you have a choice in terms of where you invest your money. So, for example, if at the moment the US 10-year Treasury is at 4.5%, and the New Zealand rates are below that, in a relative sense, where is that money likely to flow? So, overseas investors, they have a choice as to where that money goes. The US, up to now, has been kind of considered the pinnacle, or the benchmark, or the safe haven sort of bastion of where money goes. Quite rightly, that should be questioned now. But what I'm trying to say in a relative sense, if US rates go up, it makes New Zealand less attractive, more money comes into New Zealand. So that's just another way of framing that question that we've discussed before. We've probably said pretty much exactly that last time, but anyway. Yeah. Rightio. So what's in our mind for the coming quarter? Watch, worry and wait. It's been a tough time being an interest rate advisor, or even an interest rate advisor last quarter. It's kind of a situation you kind of have to filter out the emotions and try and look to the facts, however sort of nebulous those facts sometimes are. But that's why we have a Treasury policy to provide us with those guardrails, and hopefully experience, market knowledge, being well researched, and in many cases just being patient will put us in good stead. So that's kind of look at. So watch, worry and wait. Second point there, we've got a situation where potentially there's a debt repayment that we could do on the 17th of June, which looks highly likely. I've already tentatively incorporated that in my cash flows, my debt forecast, and obviously we'll continue to monitor your cash flow needs. Okay, so throughout 2025, hey, look, I think that first line there, the extent of Trump's tariffs, I think that surprised everybody. Including the Fed, and I think a lot of people even close to the president as well. So what does that mean in terms of Bancorp's view on interest rates and Bancorp's recommendations to ECAN going forward? So last time I was here, we were pretty much at a situation where we thought 325 was likely to be the low of the OCR cycle in terms of this cycle. And the general plan was to move your fixed rate hedging to the middle of the policy bands. Given the level of uncertainty and given the change in forecast from the banks and just the general volatility, we've now basically just decided to be a little bit more patient, and we're going to probably sit at Treasury policy minimums for the time being, given the balance of weight to a lower interest rates. Now, Catherine Lagarde, I think she kind of said it well, is that and this is kind of from the European Central Bank. She kind of said, look, just be prepared for a big movement either way, which I thought was outlined how difficult this game is. But let's have a look at what the banks are now saying. Westpac was the last bank to move last week, who are now forecasting a low of 3% in terms of the interest rate cycle. ANZ, which had previously been one of the hawkish, hawkish means higher interest rates rather than low interest rates, they're now forecasting a 2.5%, which is the lowest of the banks that I follow. So again, you've got to take that with a grain of salt. It was only February 24 that ANZ was talking about the possibility of a 7% OCR. So just because the bank says it doesn't mean it's a prophecy. And like anyone, forecasting tricky. But as a personal view and a Bancorp view, we still see 3% as a pretty good bet in terms of the OCR, the most probable outcome in terms of the OCR. The challenging bit for us is that the yield curve has changed. And the yield curve is just jargon for the difference in interest rates between short-term interest rates and long-term interest rates. A year ago, we would have had a situation where short-term interest rates were higher than longer-term interest rates, which basically meant strategies such as forward start swaps could be done at lower interest rates than where current interest rates were. That's flipped around the other way. So we've had to modify our approach in terms of our recommendations.
Given that volatility, do you see that yield curve changing, or do you think it might steepen in time, the longer term debt versus where we are at the floating end of the short term debt? Do you see the yield curve actually steepening further, or do you see it flattening out in time? I'm just yes, you've talked about us holding more floating and not fixing because of the internal factors, but ultimately those longer term rates are driven by America and the like. So do you believe the curve will rise or steepen, or do you think it might flatten out in time?
It should flatten out in time, but I'll use last week as a reference. Yeah, in time. Probably 6 months would be my hope, but I'll just use last week as a reference, right? Because last week we had a situation where we had stuff that would generally be classified as good news for the bond markets in terms of the tariffs being reduced. That means lower than otherwise inflation. And we had a good US CPI number, again, favourable for cutting rates. Yet, US long-term rates went higher. And I think no one knows for definitive, but my view is that, again, we'll use the global investor analogy that we were talking about before. I think it's a situation where the US previously was held up here in terms of its place in terms of not safe haven's not the word, but the premium investment location. I think that has been shaken. So I do believe we're seeing flows out of the US into other parts of the world. Germany, the German interest rates are a really good example. They've gone the other way around. So there's good kind of data you can kind of put together, and so sometimes things like economic fundamentals get sort of washed away by the flow of money. And again, that I'm not trying to make light of the situation, but I'm just trying to illustrate there's a lot of considerations that make, yeah.
Sorry, Councillor Swiggs had a question. I might just jump in there, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Edge.
Yeah, I was wanting to understand, and you've got it here in your next slide, but if you go back to the other slide, if that's okay, the swaps, the long-term swaps are going up. The 10 years is moving slowly up at the moment. And how does that, and then if we've got a lowering OCR in New Zealand, what's our strategy around our debt and how we're managing that? Because it's kind of, we've got this conflict of diverging ways that monetary policy is sort of working.
So what we're trying to do is to get ECAN to a situation where we get the most benefit from the lower OCR rates as we can, yet maintain policy, which means basically we've kind of got that, we've got that tension. We don't want to do the forward start swaps because they're too expensive. We don't want to do too much fixed rates because that means that you don't get the benefit of the floating rates. So it's just where we strike that kind of balance, and we're looking for sort of dips in the market to do that. So sorry, just to answer the question. So at this point in time, we're doing more swaps or fixed rates commencing now than what we would have done a year or 6 months ago. So less forward starts, more. Yeah.
Because my only concern, is and maybe it comes at another time when you come in, is that at some stage that may just flip like boom, and then we sit in this situation where we may have to change the scenario, and then our forward forecasts on our assumptions may be all out of kilter. So It's just my only worry about having shorter term versus the longer term.
Well, as a personal rule, I've two rules when it comes to this game. The first rule, always stay within your Treasury policy. Second rule, never forget the first rule. So maintaining Treasury policy to me is the most important part of this role, and as I say, that's our risk guardrails. And I do want to give you some buffer, and we have got some sort of buffer there, and we've got different levers we can pull in terms of approaches on that. So yeah, understand that, but yeah.
I think I like your two rules, and the other point is that actually up till now that Treasury policy has served us very well. So we have some reason to be wanting to make sure we adhere to it, I think. I'm just keen to keep moving, but Councillor Edge.
Just quickly, I'm just in terms of the OCR rate falling to 2.75. Do you think that they could, in the next round, which is what May, July, and then another one in August, do you reckon they could drop 50 points straight away, or just keep going down at 25s, and then would reach the 2.75 by October?
Yeah, you're probably somebody smiling when you ask that question. Like another complexity in the last 100 days, we've lost the Reserve Bank governor. So part of the, if you like, the game is understanding the, if you like, the personality and the nuances in terms of how monetary policy is set. So the only thing, like we don't know, we haven't got a sense of that at the moment. But based on everything that I've seen from the Reserve Bank and global central banks, they are certainly erring on the side of being dovish, i.e. lower rates rather than higher rates. But I think in the current situation, particularly with the news in the last week, though that may change with the tariff sort of situation softening, I think a series of 25 points cuts probably makes sense. Remember, it's every 6 weeks they can act. So I think 25 is the most likely situation.
Okay, thank you. We'll just keep moving.
Yeah.
Tom, please.
Right. A special topic, credit rating. I think, again, just emphasising news here that I think there's 39 councils in New Zealand that have a credit rating. There's 39 out of 65, and only 5 of those councils now have a AA plus credit rating. ECAN, one of those. So that tells you how good your balance sheet is. Though, in saying that, in terms of a credit rating, what the likes of Fitch and Standard & Poor's look at, it's not whether an organisation is either good or bad, but it's just a measure of a entity's ability to repay debt, and to put that your credit rating in some sort of context, AA plus. The banks are AA minus, so the ratings go AA plus, AA minus. So it gives you an idea where ECAN sits. So. And interesting enough, no Standard & Poor's rated companies, no Standard & Poor's rated local authorities have a AA rating, AA plus rating anymore. Largely related to water, but different topic. Any questions on that?
Any questions? No? Any further questions? Councillor Swiggs?
Have you seen any fallout from the Standard & Poor's what was the word I'm looking for here? Reducing, or what is the word? The whole of the councils, the institutional outlook. That's the one. The institutional outlook.
The answer to the question is yes.
Have you seen any impact?
Yes. Following that, there was about 5 councils that were downgraded. Yeah.
So there was the 5 councils that were downgraded, but have they had any longer term, or is there any other like increase in cost of debt or anything like that from like LGFA?
That's quite an involved topic actually, but happy to talk about that another time if you like. But yeah, it's quite interesting sort of stuff. Change in cost is only 5 basis point difference between a downgrade and not, so it's not a big deal. It's from a local authority point of view. I quite like the Standard & Poor's line. They talk about anything between a AA and a single A is still degrees of excellence, so they're all very good credit ratings. We have seen some councils think about changing from Standard & Poor's to Fitch because they've got a very different methodology. Well, they appear to have a very different methodology. It has caused angst, yes. Even at an LGFA level as well, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Good questions there. Dave, you got anything else you want to add at all from a management point of view? No?
No.
Okay. If there are no further questions, the resolution is that we receive the quarterly report from Bancorp Treasury Services to 31 March 2025, as is in the attachment, and confirm that Environment Canterbury remain compliant with its Treasury policy and borrowing covenants. Do I have a mover, please? Thank you, Graham. Seconder, Councillor Ward. All those in favour? Anyone against? No. Thank you. Thank you, David. We'll move on to 9.1, which is in relation to the Audit Risk Resolution and Status Report. And Giles, it's you, please.
Yeah, as you'll see from the paper, all of the resolutions, outstanding actions are complete, but obviously happy to take any questions.
Any questions for Giles? No questions at all on 9.2. Just give everyone a second to get there. Page 157 of the papers. All right.
No, it needs to move in second to 9.1 first.
Sorry, we're at 9.1 in the papers. Good point. Page 153. Okay. Well, the resolution is that we note the status of previous resolutions, which are all complete. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Edge. A seconder. Councillor Southworth, thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favour? All right. Anyone against? Thank you. Carried. 9.2 now. Page 157. The Audit and Risk Committee report, a committee work plan and policy update. Giles.
So this is a standing agenda item for the committee. It summarises the work plan for the committee and also the current status of the corporate and council policies, also highlighting those policies that are due to be approved before the next committee meeting. I draw your attention in particular to the update in relation to the people policies that Joe, as the Chief People Officer, is working hard to consolidate. The approval date that is given for those with corporate policies is the end date for the final approval, noting that individual chapters of the book, if you like, will be approved on an ongoing basis over the next few months via the Chief Executive. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions on the policy update and the schedule for the timing of those? Yes, Councillor Southworth.
Thank you. Yeah, I had one. We have a climate action plan and it's a holistic, so it covers multiple areas of our work, and it's not really clear to me where we get to see that the actions are being implemented or how, and no clear tracking because it comes bits and pieces through the quarterly reports. So is there somewhere within this work programme where that could fit?
Can I request that the Director of Science, Tim Davey, provides some visibility of where assurance will be provided as the lead director for the Climate Change Action Plan?
Thank you. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Chair, and kia ora koutou. Yes, I mean, you're quite right that the Climate Action Plan has bits of work spread throughout, and it has been deliberately done that way. But I'm also aware that we have brought it to you as a single piece at various times. Look, I think the best thing for us to do is to go away and think about how we can bring it. The best place would be the Regional Delivery Committee, and I think we can do that. It's just a case of, rather than having it in the bits and pieces, perhaps once a year, bring it together in one piece. And so I'll take that up as an action. Kia ora.
Thank you. Councillor, you happy with that? Okay. Thank you. Councillor Edge.
Yeah, my question was just confirming that with the work plan and the proposed meeting for November, that there would be a special induction program or paper for the incoming or the new Audit and Risk Committee.
Yeah, Charles.
Yeah, I can confirm that extensive work is already underway through the governance team, led by David and Lisa, to look at overall council induction. And one of the things that is being actively considered is how we ensure that councillors are inducted and are aware of the relevant responsibilities of each committee, and obviously particularly in relation to the Audit and Risk Committee, given its more specialist nature in terms of the technical subject matter. So it's certainly on the radar.
Great, thank you. Any further questions on the work plan or the policy updates? Okay, if not, we will put the motions that the Audit and Risk Committee endorses the Forward Committee work plan as per attachment 9.2.1 and endorses the status of the Council and corporate policies, including those policies that are scheduled to be approved before the next meeting of the Audit and Risk Committee in August as per attachment 9.2.2. Do I have a mover? Thank you, Graham. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Robinson. Any further discussion? All those in favour? Anyone against? Thank you. Carried. 9.3 on the agenda is the Audit New Zealand Audit Plan, and I would welcome Dave and our Audit Director, Chantal, to come and speak to the plan as per the pack. Please, over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Chair. The recommendation will be that after Chantal has outlined her report, that it's an endorsement paper, this one. The only thing I'd add just in front of this is that we've been working with Chantal over a very practical issue around the adoption of the annual report and financial statements within that. And as a practical response, it's likely that we are targeting the Audit and Risk on the 1st of October to, I guess, endorse those accounts and recommend them to an incoming council. And that's a practical response in terms of two things: our team's ability to produce those accounts and get them through the process, and in parallel, Chantal's process to audit those. And that's the context with which you should, I guess, think about this as well. So I'll hand to you, Chantal.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back to discuss that when we approve the plan, but over to you. Thank you, Chantal.
Hi, everyone. In terms of the audit plan, I don't think that there's anything in here that would be surprising to any of the members of this committee. It is, if we look at the focus areas for the audit this year, they're around the valuation of assets, and the which includes the impairment of assets and the risk of management override, which is considered a significant risk across every organisation. It is a valuation year for the infrastructure assets. So we'll be looking at that, and the valuation of forestry assets and asset impairment, something that needs to be considered every year. In terms of some of the other items that you would see in the audit plan for this year that you may have not seen previously, is there's one change in the accounting policies, accounting standards, around the presentation of audit fees, which we'll work with ECAN to make sure that those are presented in line of the new requirements. The other item is the mutual liability risk pool scheme, and making sure that any risk attached to member councils is appropriately disclosed within the annual report at year end. The other item that we just have raised as an area of awareness is that the DIA is working on a set of benchmark performance measures, which may or may not change the focus in terms of the performance measures we've selected for testing. So those are the ones that we've selected on the basis that we think the public would be most interested in and are focused on the main delivery items within the organisation. If the DIA changes some of their focus and they believe some of the other ones become important, we will have to consider that, and those could change those performance measures. We haven't, and one of the questions is, have you heard anything? The answer is no, we have not heard anything. The other item that is also quite new is the integrity self-assessment survey. So we've been in touch with your executives to let them know that Audit New Zealand is conducting an integrity survey this year. This is a voluntary option. It does not impact your audit opinion at all. It does not impact if you choose to be involved or not choose to be involved. It makes no difference from an audit perspective. This is an information gathering process that our Specialist Audit Services team is involved in terms of this year. In terms of your materiality, it's consistent with the approaches that we've followed in previous years. So there's nothing to point out there really. On page 177 is the targets that we've selected from your new suite of performance measures. They're in line with the services that we would have selected in previous years, and these are the ones that have come up from our perspective as being important to your users of your annual report. And that, I think, is the main thing. As mentioned, we do have a to be confirmed in the timetable around the audit opinion issue and the issuing of the draft report. As Dave's indicated, we're working towards figuring out exactly what days those are, but we've agreed that clearance will be worked on for the 1st of October. That does place responsibility on ECAN in terms of delivering what we need in order to meet those timeframes, and we'll be talking about key deliverables over the period to make sure that that's met. And that's it. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chantal, and thank you for the plan. I think it's very well written, nice and clear, and thank you for highlighting the changes. So happy to take questions and if anything specifically on that proposed timetable. So Councillor Swiggs.
Yes, mine was on the proposed timeframe, and so I suppose it's from Dave and potentially Giles. Do we have confidence we can meet those timeframes? And I'm cognizant that when we first got it's election year, you'll have a new council coming in, and I remember when I first got on this council here, it was way down the track that we were signing off an annual report. We're already almost signing off an annual plan, and it's completely unacceptable. So is there confidence that you've got the information and everything is in-house to then give to audit, and then is audit confident that you can get that turned around so that we don't have that situation again?
I haven't been through one of these processes here, but I've inquired about the very question. But what gives us the confidence in the team? And like, I have a high degree of confidence. I have a high degree of confidence of our internal team and also our responsiveness to Audit New Zealand. We've seen them come in for an interim audit. The team's responded well. So based on my inquiry, I'm confident on our part and that we'll work well with Audit New Zealand over that period.
I would agree with that and support that. I think the only thing that's probably worth highlighting, which I think was hinted at, is the final adoption of the annual report. And we're talking to Audit New Zealand, given that there is a statutory deadline of the 31st of October. I think we will be pragmatic between the two organisations and recognise that it may be after that to give the new council the opportunity to at least get their feet under the table, recognising that that is technically not compliant with the statutory deadline, but I think that's what Audit New Zealand are proposing in terms of being pragmatic.
We don't propose anything. We'll work with what council is able to do in terms of setting up the meetings that require for the adoption process. The initial discussions were about whether or not council would be able to adopt before elections, and ECAN was one of the councils that we've resourced to be able to adopt pre-election should it have been able to be met from a meeting perspective. So we have resources available until the end of September. It is a similar timeframe to what we worked on last year. I think there's only sort of 5 days difference between last year's timeframe and this year's timeframe. Council has always worked well with Audit New Zealand in terms of providing the information we need Saying that, there are some risks this year in terms of you have a brand new suite of performance information. So as we work through that, we will make sure that we are on a no surprises path. If we do identify anything, we will let management and council know if there are any concerns that we're experiencing as we go through that process. As Dave has said, as we've come in for interim already, we've managed to pull some work forward. So we've done some pre-final testing already this year. We've documented the systems and processes around understanding the new performance measures, so that we're able to have an efficient and focused review when we come in at final. So we will continue to communicate as we go through that.
Great, thank you. Follow-up question? Yep.
So the plan, you've got those risks identified within the plan. They all kind of look like they're equal in weighting. Has there been any and is there a better way of highlighting what is more risky than less risky in terms of that? Because it just looks like all risks have been lumped into one space, and from a reading point of view, I just go, oh, is everything critical or is everything not so critical?
The audit includes a lot more things than are included in the audit plan. So what we've done is, with the fact that valuations are done on a cyclical basis, that naturally poses a risk to the process around information available. The core risk around management override is a standard risk, and that would impact journals, estimations, any management bias around the presentation of the financial statement. So that could touch a lot of things within your annual report. And then obviously the risk factors around your performance information, because all of those are new, they unfortunately do carry equal risk currently in terms of derailing the audit process.
Yeah. So I think, as Chantel's indicated, there's a real intention to work with the management team to make sure we hit that deadline, but she is signalling there is some risk around particularly those new measures. And again, the valuation year issue, sometimes that can raise issues, hopefully not, but there is a little bit of risk around that. It's not a completely vanilla kind of year where it's just the same as last year, rolled out the same plan type of thing. So there are some risks. Councillor Edge, I think you had a question.
Thanks, Chantal. That's great. A potential risk. Well, is it a potential risk with the DIA benchmarking report coming out late and then finding that you've actually got to change things? It sounds like that's potential.
Yes, of course, there is that potential. If it is something that we haven't already selected, it would mean that we would have to redocument the system and work through that. So that does place a little bit of risk on audit timing. But theoretically, all performance measures should be overseen within the council. So there should be no internal risk around delivering those numbers. It would just be an audit timing risk.
Supplementary. Page 170. Page 175. The financial statements materiality. The figures you've got there just changed a little bit. Is that from looking at the specific materiality 9.3? Will that make things a little bit faster in terms of the evaluation of anything to do with material change?
Yes and no. It depends on how many errors are within a set of financial statements. Theoretically, that's the top number that we work on in terms of reporting purposes, but we could have errors above our trivial threshold, which is that 465,000, which we would have to analyse overall to make sure that in aggregate we're not dealing with a problem. So in actual fact, the number that is of interest would be the 465 trivial number from an Audit and Risk Committee perspective. But theoretically, our materiality starts increasing when your own internal numbers start increasing, and therefore the sample numbers tend to be around about the same amount.
Thank you. And just to add to that, Councillor, my understanding is historically, Chantal, we haven't had a lot of uncorrected misstatements in the audits here. So where errors of that size or magnitude are reported, if there are any, generally management and the auditors have been able to agree on the need to make the change, and therefore the audit can sort of move forward. Yeah. Okay, Graham.
I guess parting shot. Pages 167 through the next few pages, where the key risks are there. There's very definite areas that the regional council has primary responsibility for, establishing that the valuations are appropriate, correct, etc. As a result, this committee should really be having a look and satisfying itself that the work's been done, that there's nothing obvious from what we know as governors, we in the greatest sense here know, and looking at it, I guess I have in the past been vocal on valuation forestry assets. Love to talk to you, Mike, as auditor to auditor type thing, to pass on that little gem. It's not material for these accounts because our forestry, we've got a reasonable amount of it, but it's probably not going to be a number. But I should have a chat to you and pass that one on before I depart. Re the timetabling at the end, really unfortunate where the election date's been set. I'd love the government to decide that it was actually the 11th of November instead of the 11th of October to allow the outgoing council to fulfil its statutory financial reporting duties before departing. But we're in the hands of the electorate here as to how many of you good people end up back here again. So hopefully the continuity, but if not, it's very important that the independent members can provide assurance to what has happened in the previous council, and again that recommendation to the incoming council. It may be that it does put you in technically in breach of statute because of the time from declaration of the result through to forming council and all those sort of things. My suggestion is be upfront with and put a note in the accounts. We are in breach and it is because, and just make it obvious as to the reason it's when it was decided the election date was, and left and right hand in government probably not thinking and talking. But good luck.
Thank you. Thank you for those parting words. Look forward to the discussion on forestry, I think. Okay, any further questions or discussion on the audit plan? If not, we'll put the motion, please, that the committee endorses. If you can just bring that up for me, thank you. That the Audit and Risk Committee endorses the Audit New Zealand Audit Plan for 2024-25 as per attachment 9.3.1. I have a mover, I think, from Councillor Robinson. Thank you. Seconder from Graham. All those in favour? All right. Anyone against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Chantal. We look forward to hearing how the audit progresses. We are up to 9.5, funding mechanisms for subsidiary loans. And Dave, that's you, so you can remain in the hot seat. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. So this is a noting paper. It's in response to notice of motion, and it's the council that's asked to bring it back here for an update. So this paper provides that update. In simple terms, we have had two pieces of correspondence, one through the council chair from the Minister of Finance, which is a more general, conceptual but important comment, and the second is through communications with Treasury officials themselves, which is far more targeted to them not being in favour specifically around a subsidiary loan for wilding conifers, and they went further to say, and probably any other things as well in simple terms. So it's a combination of both of those things that are part of this update here. The recommendation 3 notes that staff were to work with the chair, deputy chair, and Councillor Scott and Ward, and that has happened. And I'm not sure whether the chair or deputy chair want to speak to that, but I think well, I should ask them that. Yeah, Chair, is it useful to add to that at this point or not?
Oh, no, not for me.
No. Okay.
it was useful to be able to present that to the two councillors who have been on about this for quite some time. And it's disappointing. There is definite disappointment because there is so much work that needs to go and happen down in that space. And I'm not going to speak for the Councillor Ward who is in the room, and I think he'll have some words for that. But you know, it's a shame that we've got to this point because there is definite work that needs to be done. But it was good to sort of know where we stand, and we need to think about how we focus what money we do have to get the best bang for buck.
Thank you. So, David, you anything else you want to add before I open up further discussion? Anything else you want to add before I open up further discussion? Okay, happy to take further commentary. Councillor Ward.
I seem to get everything that starts with W, wilding pines and wallabies, but anyway. We're very disappointed, I guess. You know, on Monday, another farmer took me for a flight in his plane, and you can just see the problem growing daily. And, you know, and it's interesting, Minister of Finance says other parties, yet we've tried to have conversations with the power generators, and they don't seem to want to have the conversations yet. You know, there's been some numbers done. If we don't do anything, we could lose potentially $500 million worth of power generation in the next few years. And, you know, and in a winter where we look at having further power shortages this year because Pukeki's low, we've got to be very mindful of this problem. And I guess too, we have a lot of visitors that come to the Mackenzie, and maybe that's another option to raise some funding as well. But I just feel that not all avenues have been explored for future revenue to solve this problem. I'll just leave it at that. If there's any questions.
Yeah, duly noted, certainly the disappointment. Any other commentary? Graham?
The risk that we have here is that the millions and millions of dollars that's being spent to get on top of this is going to be wasted. And that, to me, as someone who drives through the Mackenzie country pretty regularly, is really concerning. That it's very much a short-term view, and if we've just got to find a way to keep this work going, or we're going to lose the Mackenzie country and its natural beauty that's there. And everyone thinks it's not their problem, but actually it's everyone's problem. Yeah. And how do we find the funding for it? That may be perhaps stepping a wee bit outside the independent and expressing a view in that, but I guess on the way out I'm allowed to.
Duly noted for now. I'll go back to Councillor Wood, and I'm going to come to Carolyn.
So I should have just added that every year that we do nothing, we go backwards 20%. And so last year we were $7.5 million worth of deferred maintenance, and this year we're staring the same figure in the barrel. So, like, you know, our reason for trying to raise that money was to have $10 million for the next 2 or 3 years to get on top of the game again.
Yeah, noted. Carolyn?
Yeah, I think the issue for me from the letter was that there's an implicit invitation there to provide some kind of framework that would look at identifying who might these other beneficiaries be and on what basis might those contributions be made, because this is clearly a letter drafted by Treasury officials and signed by the Minister. Given the significant number of Crown ownership there, the concept of internalising the externalities kind of appeals as a way of highlighting exactly how you might allocate some of those costs. But it did strike me as well that there's an opportunity to be reasonably explicit about the nature of these issues, because this is a obfuscation rather than a clarification, and it's kind of an invitation to present the compelling nature of the choices that are implicitly being made and traded off, where the language is being used to disguise the nature of the trade-offs that are being made. So it's placing an obligation on ECAN, which is not a particularly reasonable one, but there is an invitation there to provide something that makes it harder for the decision to constantly be obfuscated and deflected and deferred.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I'm not sure within council, before I come to the questions, where, I mean, obviously not an audit risk committee meeting other than the financial risk around it, but I'm assuming this sits on the agenda of one of the other. Yeah, okay. I'm not sure, sorry, which two councillors went first, so I'll go Grant first, Councillor Edge, sorry, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Swiggs.
I agree with both Graham and Carolyn about the invitation by inference in this letter seems to indicate where we should go for further targeted, and even on page 196, item 6 and 8 point to other ministers and the MPI. But and the two issues that I picked up under the cost, compliance and communication, was there risk, and it says there none. But one of the real risks, which has just been pointed out, is that we have this iconic landscape, high country landscape within the New Zealand context of tourism, loss of production, loss of amenity value, and it's huge. It's significant. So, I mean, you could international tourism and stuff. So, you could put a dollar figure on that about what happens when a whole lot of people don't want to come anymore. And the other thing is climate change impacts. We have talked before about fire risk, and what would that do? So, there's a couple of things there that you could, in a response, if it was explicit, that you actually identify those key things.
Yeah, thank you. Just a question from me. I mean, has council actually considered getting a piece of work done that would potentially value that impact?
I can't answer that off the top of my head. Stephen would probably be best to understand it, yeah. But
Stephen Hall, the Director of Operations, is obviously actively involved in the issue of wilding conifers, and was at the meeting with the relevant councillors and Chair and Deputy Chair. There are certainly things that he is conscious that we need to do, irrespective of the subsidiary loan question, which is obviously what we were specifically referring to. And I take the point, Councillor, around those wider risks and financial implications, absolutely.
I haven't been involved in this forever, but I understand that obviously there was a national program, so all of those things are pretty well known. It was funded previously to the levels that we've been used to, but of course that's been pulled back. So I think most of that will be there.
Yeah.
In terms of restating it, I think we've done that numerous times, but we did agree that, and it's in the next steps here, that we will follow that up.
Follow that through.
So discussions between myself and Dion and Nick and Peter to say what are we going to do next and get that support from Stephen and his team to write that response up and go back to them. So like you've said, Carolyn, there is an opportunity and an encouragement to do that. So I'm sure we will. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that environmental and economic impact presumably was done at the time that the funding was approved initially. Just conscious
I think maybe the fire risk issue that Grant's brought up may be newer, but I'm only assuming that there's some of that in there, but we could definitely check that and make sure that's highlighted as well.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on that before we put the resolutions? No? Can we have the resolutions then, please? Thank you, Dave. You have nothing else, Dave, at this point? We note, so the resolutions are that we note that the Minister of Finance has indicated that it is her expectation that all parties who benefit from controlling the spread of wilding conifers financially contribute to the program. We note that Treasury have stated that it is unlikely that Treasury would support Environment Canterbury's proposal to raise a loan facility for Crown repayment in relation to the wilding conifer program, and that Treasury is unlikely to support subsidiary loans for other work. It notes that staff will work with the Chair, Deputy Chair and Councillors Scott and Ward on next steps. Thank you to move. Thank you, Councillor Ward. Someone like to second. Graham's, and again, he likes to get on the papers today. Thank you, Graham. All those in favour? Anyone against? Thank you. Carried. Okay, well, we've hit just on 2:30, and as indicated in the changes to the agenda, we will now move into the PX part of the meeting so that we can receive our legal update. Can we have the resolution, please, to go into Public Excluded? Moved by Councillor Sunkel, seconded by Councillor Robinson. Those in favour? All right, thank you. We also move to allow staff and Chantel to remain in the room for this session. Anyone else? Well, it's as per the resolution, which has been approved. So, without further ado, welcome to the table, please, and we'll move straight into the agenda item in relation to an update, please, on the legal status. Everybody, welcome back. Thank you for being prompt. We are back in the open agenda and we're at 9.6, which is the assurance update. So Dave and I think Curtis is going to join you back to the table. Thank you, and happy to hand over to you, please.
Thanks, Chair. So, look, there's some points in here on the internal audit charter and assurance framework, which we're seeking some feedback from this discussion. I think it's probably best, I'm lucky to have Curtis as an expert here and he can talk to this as well. I think I'll leave the total mobility one till after that discussion and then perhaps take any questions on that specific piece of work after Curtis has covered the bigger issue.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So on those first two recommendations, just thought it was worth adding a little bit of context before opening up for questions. I guess the first thing I would say is that what's presented in here when we think around both the internal audit charter but also the assurance framework should really be seen as an evolution and part of good continuous improvement practice. So we're continuing to look to how we improve moving forward. Secondly, I guess to note that the committee has previously identified the importance of providing greater clarity around the role of assurance and what assurance entails across the organisation, but also the role of internal audit within that. And that's really the core essence of the first two recommendations and the substance in the paper. And within that, I just raise a couple of points. First is that there are a number of assurance mechanisms which already operate within the organisation today and will continue to operate and will continue to look to improve those. The second is that we're really looking to provide clarity around the role of internal audit within that assurance framework and within that assurance system, and that's what predominantly the internal audit charter seeks to do. And then thirdly is to appreciate that a lot of that can seem quite conceptual. And so what we've tried to do through the flow diagram, which is the last attachment, is to provide some insight at a relatively high level step between the handover between the development of an internal audit plan into the execution of a specific internal audit, which is those key steps that are identified as A through F in that diagram, which hopefully gives a little bit more flavour as to how this actually translates day to day in the role of management and the committee through council. So I'll pause there and ask for any questions.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for that context. I think it is very useful, particularly the point about the fact that this is a sort of a go forward position. We know we need to, everyone wants to put in place, I would hope, a best practice internal audit and broader assurance function. And we need, as an organisation, to be confident that we actually have that in place and that from an audit and risk committee point of view, we're comfortable in the governance position that we understand what that looks like and how it's actually being executed. And as a result of that, what comfort we're getting, what assurance we're actually getting that those systems and controls that we're told are in place are actually operating effectively. So contextually, that's what this is about. Let's get a charter in place from the internal audit portion of that assurance to make sure we're all comfortable what that means. And it really is important that committee members understand what the charter is and what it is that the internal audit function is going to do and how that's going to operate, because it's a really cornerstone piece of how we as a group get assurance that those controls are actually working. So that's just a context piece. I know there's been a number of people having some discussions about this, and bear in mind this is for feedback, so the whole purpose of this session, I'll try and keep the time going. I know we've got a few people want to leave at 4ish, but some feedback, specific feedback would be useful now. I think it is also useful that if you feel you can, we can submit some feedback via email to Dave, to who? Through governance. So if you've got specific feedback, and I know some of you have done that, would welcome that. So rather than potentially going through all of that now, if there are some salient points you wanted to raise as a group, happy to do that now, and then feedback anything you've got specifically to governance. Bear in mind that we're not approving the charter today. We want that feedback and that discussion today. The intention, though, is that we would have a charter hopefully for approval in the August meeting, because it is important that we get a charter in place so that we can actually have a framework that we can be operating. Sorry, an endorsement at that point. So on those comments, I will go to the floor, and Graham, you want to go first?
Yeah, this is all very best practice looking, given where the council has been in the past on just noting that on D and E on the flowchart needs really to have cross-referencing through to the resolving differences, because from time to time, the internal audit function will have differences with the people involved in the section that's being reviewed. That's what internal audit's all about, is to challenge and to try and, between all parties, develop the best situation there is for the entity. And historically, we have seen when that goes off rails, it gets a little untidy. So that would be probably my key thing. The flowchart itself is really good. I think it's useful, but probably just cross-referencing that dispute resolution process and bearing in mind that if there's something actually really, really serious there is also whistleblower procedures and all that sort of thing in place to be read in conjunction with this. And other than that, yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, thank you, Graham. I think that is useful context for people to remember as far as that. If there was a significant item that was identified by an internal audit and they felt for whatever reason they couldn't raise it through a disputes resolution process, but it was significant enough they needed to go into the protected disclosure regime, we have a parallel piece that maybe could be referenced in here if need be, but that's rather extreme. But I agree it's available. Yeah. Carolyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the paper. I agree that it clearly sets out what one would see as best practice. My feedback, which I'm happy to provide offline, would be potentially providing slightly more context in how this function sits in a way that when it's seen in isolation, there's a danger that it's seen as operating in isolation. So everything that needs to be managed to make the function work is expected to be within this framework, when part of what would support the function be effective is the wider legal context, such as whistleblowing. The other dimension that struck me is that internal audit is a bit like a chief legal advisor function, which is something I have a bit more of an operational experience of, and that there is a duality to that, and it sits within an organisational structure and the kind of line accountability that goes with that. But it also has professional accountability for particular expertise and a particular function. And there's a tension, but they're not irreconcilable. And the Charter needs to provide the means by which that tension can be healthy and managed constructively. And I think that might just be part of the contextual statement as well, in that it's not a unique dimension. And it's part of the benefit of having professional qualifications, professional standards, and professional organisations, and that wider legal framework. So my feedback, which I'm happy to feed, would be simply to provide a bit more of a context as to how this function would operate, and to be explicit about the extent to which it carries with it those inherent tensions, which are not unique and can and will be managed consistently because of the value of the function. And part of that might also just being clear, it's an internal advisory function, it's not a decision-making function, and so those of us who have been paid professional advisors always understand that advice can be given, it need not always be taken. And so part of what the Charter is doing is providing a mechanism by which the function can provide and demonstrate the provision of that advice. But equally, decision makers who are accountable for how they deal with that advice are identified and recognised as well.
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn. And I'll come to the other comment I'd make on that is it's quite normal practice in an internal or external audit environment where there can be issues raised that in fact management don't agree with. That's perfectly fine. You don't have to have a resolution of all the points. They can actually identify things and raise them, and potentially there might be management note that they disagree or agree with the finding, but maybe disagree with what the recommendation might be and how you'd fix that. That's perfectly fine, and it may be appropriate that ends up in a committee like this for discussion, and at that point a decision on, well, okay, what are we going to do about this? So it's not necessarily every time that an audit point's raised there has to be an initial kind of resolution, for want of a better word, of that point. But we need a cultural awareness that actually it's okay for people to raise those issues and actually for there to be potentially a disagreement of sorts, and that's actually okay. It's not about having some sort of sycophantic kind of discussion where everyone just agrees all the time on what the issues are. Councillor Karakia.
Thank you for the paper. Again, I took all what the previous speakers have actually said. One thing, though, that I thought was really interesting actually was around this thing, because it was something over a year ago now little earlier in the piece where I talked about a cultural audit. And we did do some meetings actually with the our Tuia team here and all of that. But one thing that I don't actually see in this paper is that there was a discussion around, what actually is an internal audit when you're talking about a cultural audit. And to me here, we're actually talking about the involvement of Papatupu Runanga. And that wasn't the original idea. It was about our own audit so that we could actually track that journey there, the Tuia journey. And because, we're seen as a very progressive council in that space. And so how do we, and we actually talk about our Tuia journey. We talk about a number of things. But how can we actually ensure that we are definitely delivering, on what we're saying? Are we actually doing it? And so when the discussion came, we kind of probably need to go wider. And then that's where, we don't really, and no disrespect to the Papatupu Runanga, but if we go that wide, well, then it in some ways, we feel, well, the way we felt it was actually, we lose control of it a bit, and then it becomes 10 Papatupu Runanga have an input into our internal audit, cultural audit. And I see even, we're not talking now about cultural audit. And we've kind of changed the name a little bit. So I just thought that my input into that would be is that we probably have gone too wide on this thing when we're talking about this cultural audit. We need to probably pull it in.
Okay, thank you. Giles, do you want to respond to that, please?
Thanks, Councillor Karakia. I think it's a really good question and point. Unfortunately, David is not here today. I will certainly pick that up with him. Obviously, we do intend to bring back something to the next meeting, but I think a conversation with yourself and probably Ian as well would help inform what is brought back and how we frame that, because I know that the focus and scope has changed.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor.
Yeah, just further to that, look, I agree. Look, I think the key thing is that there's some independence in that process as well. And I would imagine that there would be it's almost like a 360 process, right? You'd have Runanga would have some input to it. You'd have staff and councillors having an input, but that who does it, there's got to be some level of independence so that's, it's not us doing it to ourselves completely. There's some independence in the process. That's what I would have thought. So that'd be good if that's outlined in the process that comes back to us.
Yeah, go, Councillor. Yeah.
There was a lot of discussion about that, but because it's an internal audit, that's the name suggests that it's actually within here. And sure, once we've actually ticked our boxes in some ways, well, then we can then go out and get, Papatupu Runanga's sort of response to it. But as long as we're actually comfortable in going out there with what we're actually doing, because we know we're going to get some kickback from that not every Runanga is the same. So that's why I just thought that we'd gone a little wide. But I take your point, Craig. I take your point.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you. On relation to that cultural audit? Yeah, thank you. Management. Councillor Swiggs, and I'll come to you.
Kia ora, thanks. I've only got a couple of bits of feedback on this. I thought it was actually not bad. One piece of feedback that I would have is that we just need to get on with it and have one in place. And I'm even worried about the time frame of August. It's quite a, I'd rather have this sooner rather than later, but I know that we can't do this. It's just the next meeting. But the one piece of feedback that I wanted to ask was the charter mentions the consideration of the scope for external audit and the regulators, and I just was cautious about how that coordination will be in place. I don't see that very clear because I'm very worried about duplication. Do not want duplication. One other part was it outlines the process for resolving differences, but there's not really a clear documented escalation pathway. which would come into that other thing that was discussed earlier on. And there was one other piece of feedback that I've lost the spot that it was on the definition of sponsor. I think in the definitions you could define what sponsor is. It's used a wee bit through the document. What does it mean? That'd be quite useful.
Yeah, thank you. Any response to those?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So thank you for the call out around sponsor. Happy to, and we actually did flag that in the diagram, but can flesh through the charter. That's acknowledged. I think in terms of the resolving differences, just to pick up on that, we have attempted to describe that in 3.1, acknowledging the comments from Giles earlier, but acknowledge that's another area we can look at. And I think your other comment was around the relationship with external audit as well. Happy to look at the wording. I guess the typical approach is around making sure that relationship is collaborative and constructive, and absolutely to avoid duplication, but to ensure that we are aligned around where the areas of focus are and are not in the respective roles.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, the other thing but I'll raise it now as issue is just ensuring that in our charter it does refer to our obligations as a public sector entity and the OAG's requirements and therefore Audit New Zealand's requirements. So it would be useful to have that linkage actually clear because there are some obligations that we actually have. So our charter should refer to some of those specific obligations, and I think that would help with that linkage to external audit potentially. Yeah. All three up at the same time. We'll go Councillor Robinson first.
Yeah, just trying to get my questioning. I've got about three at once, so sorry about this. Thanks for bringing this to the table, by the way, to everyone who's worked on this. I think it's really important. Like Dion said, it's sooner rather than later is good. I just guess that I would like to see at the moment the clarity around the internal audit role. And in lieu of that being filled, is it currently with the independents at this table? First, that's my first part of the question. It's more for you, Chair. Are you currently filling the internal audit positions or assisting in that?
No, I'm not.
You're okay.
Effectively, right. I would say Curtis is effectively doing that.
Okay.
Yeah, correct.
So also, just with regards for the timeline for implementing the risk framework and a conflicts register, so what would the timeline be for that? And also, part of that question, it's part of the same thing, the conflicts register, where would that sit? Or to whom that would sit?
Are you happy to answer that?
Is that within the context of this paper, just to clarify?
Yeah, so it's within basically the line of reporting and where the conflicts register within that framework would sit in relation to the internal audit function.
So within the design of both how we set up the internal audit program, but also how we undertake and scope and undertake individual internal audits, we will consider potential threats to independence and conflicts in all those situations, and where they are relevant, they will be recorded.
And I think a key part of that too is where there has been internal audit activity occur, the charter does call out the confirmation of how any internal conflict of interest or other matters has actually been addressed in the way that those individual pieces of work are done. So if you've got an internal team member who's working on a internal audit piece of work with another team, how any conflicts are managed will be part of what is reported back as how they actually committed to doing that work through the program. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Well, it's just in lieu of the actual position of that precise scope of an internal audit person or team. I guess that it feels sometimes there's an absence of being able to question effectively at an independent level questions from a councillor or the likes. And will that be available?
I think Giles would like to add to that.
So I think that one of the reasons that we also have an outsourced internal audit contract with currently with PwC, which currently runs through I think till early next year, is to ensure that we have access to specialist expertise that we can't recruit and retain because there isn't the workload for them in the organisation, but also to be really clear that where that degree of independence is required, we can use an external provider, because Curtis's role, which is the Risk Assurance and Security Manager, doesn't just manage internal audit. It manages a range of assurance functions, and it also manages risk and security, both of which would be subject to internal audit activity. So we recognise, and I think it supports what Mike was saying, is that the team or the people undertaking the internal audit function for a specific review needs to be independent of that function. And our default or our fallback position is we can outsource that to PwC where that is appropriate to do so.
Yeah, I think just to reiterate that, the key point that Curtis made earlier is that I think it's really important for this committee to understand the overall assurance framework that we have and where internal audit sits as part of that. And I think there's some work to do around how that might actually be described. I think that's what Caroline was actually also referring to, just contextually, a bigger piece that talks about all of the other assurance work that goes on, internal and external, and then I think people will be slightly more comfortable possibly around what's happening, albeit that we actually need to get on and do some work, which is absolutely relative, to be honest. Thank you. Councillor Edge.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for the report. And I want to thank staff for just amending the original draft recommendations to allow for feedback, because I think it's really important. It's certainly something that councillors have undertaken, a great deal of interest in to get that assurance level and the level of confidence that the audits that are taking place are transparent and those sorts of things. What I've done is I've already circulated to councillors and Giles and Stephanie my comments, and my comments show or indicate some changes that I think would help improve the actual charter. Clauses taken from the current one for council staff to really have a look at, and it's in a Word document so people can sort of cut and paste or whatever. But I think it is one of the key issues is making clear any dispute resolution process, that it is, as Graham McGlynn was saying, and Chair, that it's just a normal thing where differences of opinion, and actually explain those opinions, or if the paper comes to council, those differences of opinion are in the paper. It's all clear for everybody to see, debate and clarify. So it's not something that has to be hidden away and cause angst, with internally. But I mean, the scope of the audit activity, it's virtually exactly the same as the previous one. And I think I've got at the end of it some issues about the audit. Obviously there'll be an audit plan. So I think that's what you're talking about, is having what's the audit plan, how it fits in with the whole strategy, if you like, just so it's all visible, really. Whether or not, I've got at the end of this, whether or not my work on this came when I listened to a seminar run by the Auditor General, and they had invited the CEO of the internal auditor audit process in New Zealand, in Audit New Zealand, and it was a really good summation of what other people were doing and what their thoughts were. So whether or not we got somebody in, I think the person is possibly in Canterbury anyway, but that's something I thought. But look, they're there. We're thinking that perhaps external assessments undertake every 3 years instead of 5, and measures for that are in accordance with the IIA. But anyway, look, I think we're trying to be constructive, and it would be good to other councillors could sort of, have a look at it as well. And then I think, Chair, coming back to us, I don't know, end of mid-June or something like that, so we can have just a quick understanding of what the changes might be, what's acceptable, so that when it does go so that we are on track for August, really. But I think, Caroline, what you're saying is really good as well. I think that those things need to be upfront, explicit, and there's no ambiguity, or as less ambiguity as we can manage.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chief.
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, I agree. If everyone's comfortable, I think we should set a sort of mid-June date for feedback, please. That gives time for management to take that feedback, put it into something which is able to come to the August meeting, hopefully as a final draft for approval or endorsement at that point. Okay. Did you have a point, Councillor Southworth?
Yeah, just three quick things. So one is that there's like guiding standards given, for example, and reference to people having professional development and things like that. But there's not, and it might refer to the roles question. There's nothing about the sort of expectation of standard or chartership or the qualification and experience of the person that is then going to have the professional, etc. So it's that starting point. I think it would be helpful to have maybe some clarification around that. In terms of the sponsor part, I noticed in the attachment there's an owner column, but not a sponsor column. So that's somewhere that would be quite clear and visible where that sits. And then I just wanted, in the back, under performance monitoring and improvement, point 5, or section 5, it says an external assessment completed at least every 5 years. And I just wondered whether that sort of implies it could go out to 5 years. I wonder whether, just as this is sort of setting it up and really trying to establish it, whether there might be value in setting an earlier date for assessment because it's quite sort of new and trying to really establish it, and then have that as that becomes the norm down the line, but not yet.
Thank you for that. I think working backwards through your questions, I might ask you to clarify your first one. In terms of the time frame, I think my recommendation would be we'd take that under guidance as we move forward as to when the most appropriate first iteration is. It can be a little bit pros and cons as to how quickly you do the first one, as to whether you actually there's work being done to improve it by the time you get a review done. So I think we just need to keep an open mind around that first time frame. Your second one, I believe you're referring to the open actions. Is that when you're in the column of owner? Because that will refer to an action owner.
Yeah. So, but I'm sort of assuming that there's a sponsor as well as an owner, and that but there isn't a sponsor column, and just because it refers to sponsor through the document, and I was looking for where.
Apologies. That's an easy update. We can update that for future reporting. That's fine. And sorry, could I just clarify your first question?
Oh, it wasn't really a question. It was more of a comment in terms of the qualification, whether the starting point of somebody who would sit in the role or roles, whether there's some clarification around what sort of status or charge or whatever it would be. Should that sit in here?
Happy to. I think the term I would use is capabilities more than qualifications. So yes, there is absolutely, and speaking to Councillor Edge's point around the Institute of Internal Audit standards, they are an international standards organisation, don't have a regulatory function per se, but there's certainly elements of being of membership and what that provides within that. I think there's a bigger question around the capability to deliver the risk-based assurance plan that we need, which is where you have a combination of internal capability, and you also rely on external support to deliver a plan, particularly where there are items on that plan of that need specialist knowledge or a different perspective that we don't have in-house.
Yeah, thank you. And that is the point that I made earlier about I think we need to move on with some appropriate speed to getting the plan in place so that we can all agree what the plan is, so we can then agree how we're going to resource that, whether it's internally, externally, and then we're actually getting into the motion of getting assurance work actually happening more than it already is. Just conscious of time, just very quick question then, Councillor Sunkel.
It's really a point. I'm happy with what we see here, and with our independent members going best practice or a few tweaks, I'm more than happy with what we see. I am pleased that we have that piece around professional disagreement, the reporting, non-reporting, acceptance, whatever, and I think that's one of the issues we have. So if we've got some real clarity there, I find that really useful. My question is, I guess, if the independent auditor is genuinely independent, and we set up a scope of works on a rolling average, will they have the ability to go, I see something over there, and bring in a piece of work for something they see, or will they be stuck with the program they have? So that for me challenges a wee bit of the independence. So just a question around the process of, we will do this year, in order to go, but I have a funny feeling. So what's the ability?
Usually plans have some flex in them for the unknown sort of flex you required in the year, but I'll ask Curtis if he's got a response on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. And just to reflect on, again, good practice at the moment is to have more of a rolling plan than a locked plan. So traditionally, typically, you may have seen 3-year internal audit plans, even down to annual audit plans. We are seeing more, and I've certainly seen more in my time, of essentially 6-month tranches that are rolling, and gives the opportunity, both from what the internal audit function sees, but also what the organisation sees as potential new risks emerging or changes in that profile, to collaborate and to ensure that the plan is still risk-based and appropriate for what risks are being faced at the moment.
Thank you for that. Like in previous life, we would lock 3 in and have a fourth available. So there was always an opportunity at some point through the year to add another one if it was deemed necessary. Yep.
Yeah, similar version, same thing. Sorry, Giles, you.
I just echo what Curtis has said in terms of the audit plan is flexible and responsive as the organisation changes. And a great example of that is we commissioned the internal audit of total mobility. That wasn't on the plan, but we recognised that we'd had a number of potential frauds reported, and therefore commissioned that work at short notice, which is the report is included in, but it works in a number of ways.
Thank you. Look, I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to go slightly off piste here. Councillor Ward, I know you need to leave at 4. Is there anything else you would like to raise either in this agenda item or any of the other agenda items before you go?
I've had a good read and I'm happy with everything that's in those other reports.
Okay, thank you. And again, any feedback on the charter is welcome anyway. We'll get an email out probably around a date for that. Thank you.
Do that, thank you.
Councillor Southworth, you're the same. I think you can leave at 4. Is there anything else you'd like to raise on this or any of the other agenda items just before you leave?
Yeah, so just for me, on the other, later in the health and safety, there is item 4 under paragraph 14. There's like a increase in the number of people process non-critical risk incidents reported. That's sort of like more in the 1 month than the preceding 2. So what's that telling us? Is there anything that we need to know about that? And then the subsequent 2 bar charts give a total over the 3 months, but it's quite helpful when things get chunked down into month by month, because you just can see if there's pattern changes and
We're not on that.
No, I know, but I've just been asked if I would give some stuff.
Sorry,
ahead
just because they're leaving at 4, I've asked if they have anything they want to bring up going forward.
So the purple one, the 2 purple graphs, if there's value in, I'm wondering if there's value in chunking into the month by the month, an additive bar that shows the month's numbers, so you can get those seasonal monthly trends, which helps to suss is that shifting or not. And ultimately, and then public transport incident management database. Just wondering what the does that make sense? I've just written with what purpose. Work continuing. Yeah, increase in visibility, public transport incident database. That perhaps goes back to, I think, what Stephanie talked to before as well. Ultimately, is the intention there. I think it might be signalling that we are looking more at the public transport incidents in the operator space for us to reflect or understand what it is we need to do to have assurance for us. So
we already, and we do, through the public transport team, there's a separate database that is used. What we're trying to do and committed to doing is integrating it into the reporting that we provide, so we have a complete picture for council, recognising that public transport is such a large part of our business and the operators deal with the public, and so forth. There are a lot of incidents. So the intention is to integrate it into the reporting you will see here.
Okay, thank you. We'll pick those points up when we get into the health and safety for you at that point. Yeah, yes, sorry. Okay, so far away.
But I just really valued the feedback on the internal audit paper. And you'd really agree with everything that was said. I think especially what Carolyn said. For me, like being a complete outsider and newbie to this sort of stuff, I think like some structure diagram, like I get the flowchart and I get the framework drawing, but like I still don't know who's doing what. And I think that just needs to be more precise. So I think that really helps. And the point made about disagreement's okay. So making sure that's really emphasised, that that's part of the process, and that's all good. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if everyone's happy with that, we'll get an email out about feedback on the charter. We'll move into the total mobility report, please, David.
Sure. So, really briefly, I guess this is a good example of reacting. As Giles has described, an allegation came up in early January, and I understand there had been a couple of previous allegations in the same kind of space in the last year. So I took the lead in scoping this piece of work up, which was targeted around the use of the total mobility card for its intended purpose, and that kind of that part of the design process, and are the controls working effectively or not working effectively there. Deliberately, that scope was given to the external provider, and we also worked with them that we wanted them to drop down into talking with the operator as well for deliberate reasons. So look, the outcome, I'm sure you've read this. I would summarise things as, this process is ultimately designed by NZTA, and then we're a component part of that in implementing and delivering. I think PwC, my summation is they would say generally there's some really good controls that work, particularly those that have a systems sort of locked in point of view. It's where there is process and people reliance in those controls that there were some gaps found, but I think they've highlighted in terms of how material they think they are, in terms of medium and low as opposed to high, which indicates that generally the controls appear to be working as designed. I'm happy to take any question.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'll take the report as read. I agree. I think it's relatively clear. They did a pretty good job of explaining what they found and what they thought of the sort of severity, if you like, of that those recommendations. Does anybody have any questions, Graham?
In the recommendations, page 219, those two on there where there is a situation that for whatever reason a customer's card is, or entitlement to total mobility is cancelled, and the operator that's sitting there and the driver has no way of knowing because of delays and updates to our systems and the communication through. I just don't think it's a fly-off because of our system shortfalls that the operator should be put in a position where they don't get paid. It's incumbent on us to make sure that when they swipe the card or whatever, that it correctly identifies whether it's a valid card or not at that point. I think you're going to run into problems trying to implement those recommendations.
Dave, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I'm just trying to recall back. This gets into a little bit of detail because my understanding is from Stuart in that each operator can actually have a point of connection, which is, whilst it should ultimately link and will to the RideWise, it is their own software, their own point of sale, FPOS kind of machine. So, look, that's a weakness that we're working with the operators on to make sure that time is not over a long period.
Can I just clarify, if the operator has not chosen to get the latest version of the system, well, that is their problem. But if it's the case on our side, I think we've probably got to say, hey, we've got to accept it and take responsibility. Having a wee bit of history in the industry in the past, and yeah, some systems update greater, but we should have a complete approved system through, which if they use, they don't carry a risk. If the operator chooses not to have that system, then they carry the risk.
Okay, noted. Thank you. Anyone else got any other questions on those items. We've discussed the charter, we've discussed the total mobility report. Anything else before we put the resolution? Councillor Swiggs.
I'm happy to move the resolution, but I also just wanted to say thank you to getting that done. Seems like there's work to be done. Are you on time frame for getting those resolutions? You've got some dates in those in that report. Some of them have passed. Is it all on track?
Yep, the external challenge we face, as we've talked to Council on a number of occasions, is the continued delay with the MOT review. As Council will be aware, we have delayed renewing our contracts and going out to tender in anticipation of that review. There is also the procurement exercise that needs to be undertaken nationally in relation to the software that supports total mobility. So subject to those, yes.
Okay, thank you. So the resolutions have been put in relation to providing feedback on the internal audit charter, feedback on the updated assurance framework, and endorsing the management responses to the independent review in relation to the total mobility control design internal audit. It's been moved by Councillor Swiggs, seconded by Councillor Edge. Any further discussion? All those in favour? Aye. Anyone against? Thank you. Okay, moving on. We are up to 9.7, health, safety and wellbeing update. So welcome to the table, Kirsty and Joe. Thank you. You take your report as read, but I'm happy to talk to that too, please.
Is that going? Yeah. Oh, kia ora koutou. Has anyone, so I take it as read, so does anyone have any questions for me today?
Councillor Edge?
I did have a question about the critical risk program and what is, but I see there's a big chart over there. Maybe you could circulate a smaller version of it, but that's really helpful, and thanks for organising that for us. If I got any, yeah, no, look, other than in terms of the reporting charts and things, yeah, a bit like Councillor Southworth, that it looked, could you relook at that and maybe provide some more information or some additional information to that, and in terms of the critical risk stuff, maybe a bit of a narrative about what's happened with those and what's the main driver. For example, violence and aggression. Where is that occurring? Those sort of things that would be helpful. Thank you.
I can give you a little bit of background narrative to the rather large pull-up screen in the corner. So critical risk under legislation is actually something that, if it's not adequately controlled, can lead to a fatality or serious injury or illness, and it poses the greatest threat to life. So as a result of the Safe Plus audit that was done some time ago, there was an internal process of analysis and working groups, workshops, bow tie methodologies. We looked at industry best practice, and we presented the information around what the critical risks were for Environment Canterbury, which really sit in line with probably what the national standard would be. So the critical risks that you see on there, so driving, electricity, hazardous substances, working around water, those are the sort of critical risks. They're a broad umbrella of the sorts of things that, if they go terribly wrong, can cause really serious injury or death or a fatality. Each critical risk has an owner, and that owner is a director, and each critical risk has a champion, and that's generally someone who either sits at a senior management level or is intricately involved in that part of the business. Alongside that, underneath all of those critical risks, there's a purpose and scope, there are critical controls, there are standard controls, there's a risk assessment which Olivia spoke to a little bit this morning around safe systems of work, standard operating procedures, site-specific safety plans or JSAs. There's roles and responsibilities, and we also look to regulations, codes of practice, and pieces of legislation to support all of that. And that's detailed into a comprehensive document, which all staff are made available to all staff. And when they on our system, on our internal system, they can click on one of those bubbles, and it will download all of that information. We also have a health and safety app that we rolled out to our senior executive team, and they are able to do, and that was part of what Olivia spoke to again this morning, was around that sort of assurance. So they're able to do and are required to do assurance in underneath their own critical risk. Also, we've just rolled that out to every staff member. Now, we will and have done in previous papers discussed our critical risk, because we did and spoke to a lot of training that we undertook with all our people leaders, and then our people leaders were required to deliver that message down, and we're still continuing to do that to support those leaders. So it is a really large piece of work. It came out of some recommendations, and we're really proud of that piece of work, because it does uplift what could potentially harm or cause a fatality in our business, of which both of those we want to not have. Speaking to the data, I'm more than happy to give you more narrative around those each month, so you understand. And I do also speak to the fact that those purple graphs, they don't give you that sort of trend analysis. So I'm really happy to do that for you. If we look at violence and aggression, which is the one that continues to be at the top of our graphs every month, it's generally unhappy landowners or unhappy public. Those are what features. So you can understand if our consent people go out and people are unhappy with perhaps some of that conversation. Our driving is everything from and it's not necessarily related to our driving, but it could be something like erratic behaviour, tailgating, pieces of equipment that have been broken, and items related to driving. So those are our two biggest features, because obviously we're driving, the majority of our staff are driving every day. When we look at the non-critical risks and the people process, and as you know, I'm quite new, so I'm going to be looking at some of the narrative attached to some of this, because people process, you would think someone's in a process and that is perhaps a difficult process, but actually people process relates to injury and illness, and those things are sort of things like minor injuries, sprains, strains, bumped my head, small cut, someone touched an electric fence. It's great that people are reporting this stuff, because we want all of this, but that's what people process is. So I get that's where you're coming from in terms of having that narrative, so you can sort of understand what that is. So I'm more than happy to do that for the next report.
Thank you. I think that picks up on Councillor Southworth's points too, so that's very good. Are you happy, Councillor Edge?
Yeah, that's very good, thanks. Just a recent history with me. On a site visit, on a field trip, good site-specific health and safety material that we had to use. But yeah, my foolishness, touching an electric fence and getting 8,000 volts with a big bang.
I didn't realise it was you, Councillor, that's the issue that she was referring to.
Yes. Oh, no, we were about to have lunch. Everybody's sort of behind me, and I turned around, because it was only, didn't really jolt me or anything. But wearing rubber gumboots probably helped. But yeah, it was a bit of a laugh, and one of the farmers got out his reader, and about 8.1 or 8.2, 8,000, sorry, 100. But anyway, that's okay, wakes you up. But and as you say, it's a good process that the staff reported that, or and then it was just dealt with. Anyway, thanks.
Very good. Any of those of you that are left. I'm going to make a comment on that in a minute. Is there any question, comment? Oh, sorry, Councillor Robinson.
This might be slightly out of the scope, I'm not sure, but if something like that particular thing where you click on the wee thing, the wee car or something, like, so every staff member has that app. Is that right? And so they can click on that and report either something that's happened or something they can see and just question it. Well, sorry, just a wee bit of...
Yes, that is correct. So that app was released to our senior executive, and we've since this month it's been rolled out to all the staff. So if you're in the field and you see something, or in this case of the touching the wire, you could report that in the field and it automatically comes back into our system. So every single incident that occurs in the business, I get to see first, along with senior managers and direct managers.
Would that apply to us?
We haven't provided it to you, but I'm not sure. We could do, yeah.
Chief Executive's about to come and answer the question, I think. Yeah.
Same as employees, and so they should have.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll reply to that now. Because I was going to go on and say something else after that. So yes, we're more than happy for you to have that. And when I was going to round out this conversation on the critical risk framework, there are things that relate to you. So violence and aggression, certainly as you head towards the end of the year, could be something quite real for you. And so it would be worthwhile having information relating to that available for you, as well as we have an event plan, which we're more than happy to share with you as well, so that you, if you are going or organising your own event, you could use that event plan document.
Okay.
Yeah, one more. Comment on that.
Yeah.
Because it's, I'm really, really thrilled that that is in place, and congratulations to you and to Stephanie also for whoever was in the background of that. It's fantastic and very, very current. So thank you.
Yeah, I think I'd endorse that too. I think it's a great addition to the toolkit that you've got around monitoring and measuring stuff. So, and I think it would be useful if councillors were added to it, so that when they stumble on fences and do other things, they can report it. But also the planning tool would be good. Anybody else with any other questions? We have the motion up at the moment around receiving the report on health, safety and wellbeing. Do I have someone who could move that? Please, thank you, Councillor Sunkel, and seconded by Graham. Any further questions or discussions? All those in favour? Aye. Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry it's coming at the end of the day. We'll try and move that around next time, but thank you very much. And just on that point, for those of you that are left, I just jokingly said to Giles, it's a lock-in now, because if you leave too many, if one more leaves, we're out of quorum, and then note to self for me that we need to either get the thing moving quicker or make the agenda longer so that people give more time. I'm not sure which. It might be a combination of the two. So apologies. But we will carry on with the agenda, which the next is the risk management update. So welcome back, Curtis, I think, leading this. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In the interest of time and efficiency, we'll take the paper as read, and my only comment is really around the focusing on the endorsement that we're seeking of the Go Forward Risk Activity Plan. And just around that, I would summarise it as that we are, in light of good practice and continually to check and adjust and make sure we're still at an appropriate level, it's really around increasing the focus on risk discussions, particularly at senior levels in the organisation. And also, how do we make sure that we're continuing to improve the way that we upskill, provide awareness and capability to our kaimahi around risk and the role of risk, and how it can really support informed decision making. One of the key points of emphasis will be that risk is equally about opportunity and how we embrace opportunity to drive value, as it is around protecting and managing downside. So that'll be a key part of what we do over the coming period. But happy to take questions.
Very good. That's a very good point. Questions, Councillor Edge?
Yep, just quickly. page 238, focus on 4 core streams. Is that these 4 core streams that are on the dashboard?
Correct.
Councillors haven't sort of had a workshop, I don't recall for a while, about kind of considering our risk appetite. Is that something on the agenda about just, reviewing the risk appetite? Are we happy with it, or are there any changes to be made?
So my response to that is that when I talk about focus around risk discussions and the importance there, that's absolutely a precursor into some of those more significant conversations around things like risk appetite, as we will continue to look at our risk framework and ensure that it remains fit for purpose and up to date. Risk appetite is a conversation live in many organisations at the moment, and so we'll encourage that that's reviewed regularly.
I think just to add to that, my expectation would be once the new council's in place, there will be a need for a risk workshop of some description and an assessment of that council's risk appetite in any case. So it's probably something for early in 2026, I suspect. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Anything further on those from anyone? Much smaller group of people to ask the question of. That's one advantage of everyone having. Anything else? If that's not, we'll put the resolution up then, please. And Graham's going to move it before he's even seen it. Good work. Thank you. And I'm joking. And Councillor Sunkel, we've noted the strategic risk dashboard and endorsed the risk activity to lift organisational risk maturity. We have a mover and a seconder. We have. Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favour? All right. Anyone against? Thank you. Carried. Okay. We are into the sensitive expenditure report, 9.9. That is Dave, is it? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Look, I'll primarily take this as read. I just want to reassure you that this is one way of surfacing some data around sensitive expenditure. There is a whole lot of other activity and control that I'm pretty proud of with what I've seen. So, look, this is using some of the guidance from the Office of the Auditor General in terms of how it's graphically presented and where we target this for you. So, happy to take any questions.
No, I'd agree. I'd endorse it. It's a really good report, and I think the graphical display, for want of a better description, is really useful. Any comment then, questions on that? Councillor Edge?
Just a quick comment here, page 245, that the expenditure year over year analysis, and just shows that this particular year we're trending below, significantly below by the look of it. But the variances between external labour, direct labour are all quite low as well. So we're obviously doing pretty well.
I agree. Anything further? No, thank you. Okay, well, we'll put that resolution as well. Thank you, Dave. Good work on that too. Thank you. Okay, so the resolution is that we receive the report on sensitive expenditure. It's moved by Councillor Edge, seconded by Graham. All those in favour? Sorry, Councillor Robinson, he was too quick. All those in favour? Aye. Anyone against? Thank you, carried. Into 9.10, which is the report from the Chair. There's a number of items in here. And a lot of it picks up on, and I'm sure Chantal will be pleased to see this, a lot of it picks up on the guidance from the Office of the Auditor General. It picks up their draft plan, but also a number of reports that they have published in recent times. And in particular, some things I think that were useful for this committee to consider. In relation to their annual plan, the 4 strategic pillars that are, or strategic priorities that are pulled out there around strengthening core assurance role, increasing impact with public organisations, enhancing the impact of Te Ao Māori, and building on the reputation as a source of trusted information. I think we would endorse that's what we would expect an Auditor General to be doing. Giles, in relation to feedback, you've provided, I think, there in point 8, some proposed focus from feedback. We have previously, as an organisation, I believe, provided feedback on their plan, and the intention is we would go back with these points. Is that correct?
Yeah, subject to endorsement from the committee, we will draft a letter to go from Mike as the chair of Audit Committee, highlighting those points for feedback.
Just sort of have a discussion on that. We've got 2. I'll go Grant first.
Just quickly, looking at the Auditor General's annual plan, that a couple of things that I picked up of interest to me anyway would be the how effective are public organisations working together to progress government's tourism strategy. What are we doing in that space, if anything, at the moment? And the other one was the strategic priority 3, enhancing the impact in Te Ao Māori. Presumably that's on the agenda. We do so well on that. There was another one about drought. How are we performing in terms of looking out for future droughts that might happen? So those 3 things has caught my eye.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Graham?
Paragraph 11. Auditor General's in Disneyland. If he expects that councils won't be increasing rates greater than the inflation forecast does not include borrowing costs, and it's failing to recognise, particularly in TAs, that there is a devolution from central government to local government with an expectation to do more with no increase in rates. It's just unrealistic.
Yeah, I think that the intent, if I read that whole, that those paragraphs about the LTPs, I mean, they reflect what we probably already know. Most, if not all, local authorities are under significant cost pressure. They're looking at ways to try and deal with that, but borrowing seems to be something that they are looking at. That in itself adds cost, of course, and I think the slightly concerning thing across the sector is that many of them are getting close to their debt limits. So that is an option for funding future either CapEx or other activity is actually becoming a bit of a limited option. So yeah, I take your point. I think that really is in this paper for an FYI for councillors when you're considering the issues that you're facing. Where do you sit relative to the rest of the sector? Because the rest of the sector is struggling and frankly have the same, if not probably in some ways heightened issues that you have, to be honest. But your point's right, Graham. I think the expectation of the Auditor General as to how those issues are addressed is probably interesting. Okay, any further questions or comments then on that particular part of the paper or anything else, any of the other topics that were covered in there, particularly around internal audit, Department of Internal Affairs benchmarking or anything else at this point? I'll come to that. No? Okay, so before we finish then with that, the last resolution on this paper, I'd like to move to point 25, or paragraph 25, which is acknowledgement of Graham McGlynn as the independent member. Definitely, you'd like to conflict? Yes, thank you. Councillor Sunkel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's both a sad day and a happy day that Graham is moving on. For him, he's happy. For us, it's a sad day. Back in 2016, when I was first elected to council, we were part of the mixed model, and I was chair of Audit and Risk for 2 of those years there, and recognised that we were losing significant financial, legal and business acumen from council, and so resolved at the end of that term to attempt to bring independent members into the Audit and Risk Committee. It was a bit of an uphill battle because we were now back to full democracy, and there was a real will at the table to have no one appointed because we were now democratic. But it finally got across the line, and Graham was the lucky contestant, it's Graham, and then COVID came along and buggered it up, and so a mixture of us not really operating with independent members and COVID left that first 12 or 18 months as pretty rocky, but we came to it, and at the end of the term reappointed Graham, and in fact I managed to then get to the point where we would have 2 independent members. Again, that was a battle. It was kind of, the chair at the time said we're not doing 2. We interviewed and she said, that other chap's all right too, isn't it? I said, very good, we'll take 2. So today you are here through the recognition of what we lost at that time and the absolute need for that independent thought and bring the skills into the space. So to Graham, thank you very much for what you have done for us over those 6 years. You were kind of the pathfinder for us, and when we've all learnt along the way as to what the role of an independent member can be and the gifts that you give us as a council along the way. And I wish you well in your endeavours. You were the first and we'll always appreciate that. And I guess we've got some really good people coming along to follow. And I just sit here and I think I was joking about my life's work's done, just given Michael and Co here what we're achieving with the independent members and the uplift in thinking and thought. So you were the beginning, and we've got a really good process going, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll give you a right of reply in a minute, but there's other comments to be made first, Graham. So I'll go to Grant, then we'll come to management.
Yeah, agree with all those things John has said. And I also want to acknowledge, it was really a pleasure working with you as part of this audit risk or audit finance and risk committee at the time. And it was always interesting that we had you as Graham McGlynn, and then we had next to you Graham Naylor. So I can't remember now who was G1 and G2. You were G1. Oh, I see. Okay, right. It was very, very good. Well, I mean, Graham, I mean, you're sought after around the country, and you're working from one end of New Zealand to just about the bottom. So, which is a sign of your expertise over these years and your ability to have a good rapport with the councils that you're working for. And I certainly welcomed your advice completely. And as John says, we're now welcoming Michael and Carolyn, two very good people as well to this forum. So we're in good stead going forward. And thanks very much.
Thank you. Charles, I think you want to say something from management?
Very briefly, I suppose on behalf of management, I've been sitting in this chair for almost 4 years. I'd just like to thank you for your support for management, but also for the challenge that you've provided. It's been extremely useful and valuable, and I wish you well.
Thank you. And then lastly, I think from me, Graham, just thank you for the handover that you've done. It was really important for Caroline and I to be able to talk openly with you around, your expertise, and you've certainly made our role and given us some of that intellectual property that you have, which has been really important. And I know you've made the offer to still be there if we need you into the future. So thank you for what you've done in the period we've been here too. And here's a token of appreciation from the council for you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It was certainly a challenge at the beginning, John, not helped by COVID. And we had a situation with commissioners ending up handing over into democracy, and part of their role, sorry, Carolyn, part of their role was not necessarily to set it up into a democracy situation where we're handed councils with skill sets, but unfortunately, unlike the private sector where you do a skills matrix, you don't necessarily end up with all the skills that you might need in-house, and you've just got to recognise that, because that creates a risk, and deal with it and bring in the skills where you need it. Certainly it's been a great experience. It's not the first involvement that I'd had with ECAN, that I was involved in the early 2000s, a review on consenting and monitoring. So it's certainly, I'd been there before and understood a bit about the organisation. Wish you all the best going forward, and for better or for worse, Mike has for many years had my number in his phone, and ditto, and I've had his. Don't be strangers, and if there is something that I can help you with going forward, be delighted to do so. But the time has come, and we've got two very capable people sitting into that role. I feel very comfortable in stepping out the door, and maybe part of the process is the symbolic handing back of this. I was going to hand it to Carolyn, but Oliver informs me that I'm not allowed to do that.
No, that would break security rules. That would break security rules, but we will get Caroline organised. But thank you. Thank you, Graham, and thank you for all your input. It really has been valuable, and we do collectively wish you the best. And as you've noted, Grant, he's available and working along a number of other councils, so I'm sure we'll come across Graham in the future. Thank you. Yeah, you're allowed.
It's been nice sharing the chambers with you, Graham, and I personally have appreciated you as a sounding board for a number of wee issues that have come up and stuff. So thank you. And like you mentioned, don't be a stranger because, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, so all that's left, I think, for your last meeting, Graham, is we have the resolutions for agenda item 9.18, which has received a report from the chair, endorses the areas of feedback for the Office of the Auditor General, and agrees feedback on the Auditor General's annual plan will be sent, I think, via myself. You're allowed to move that, and I think I have someone who might want to second it.
I mentioned in it, I've got a conflict.
Oh, good point. You'll abstain then. Well called. Thank you, Councillor Edge. Those in favour then? Noting Graham's abstention because he's conflicted. Aye, thank you. And with that, I will bring the meeting to a close. Thank you for those of you that stayed around till the end. And I promise going forward that we will either make the agenda time go longer or address what's in the agenda, but somehow try and make it work that we can keep within the time. But appreciate all your input today. Thank you. Do we have the wording for a closing Karakia?
You have to do it.
I don't have the wording for one, unfortunately. Does someone have some wording who can help me with that? Grant?
Anuhia, ki te uru tapanui, o tānei kia watia, kia mama, tēnā kau, ti tinana, ti wairua, I ti ara takata, koia e ranga, whakaeare, aki ki runga, kia tina, humiei, tākia.
Kia ora, thank you, Grant.